Welcome, everybody. This is Gene, and this is the Mediums, Messages, and More podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at the numbers that have come out regarding the current presidential election advertising spending. And every presidential year, inevitably after Election Day, there will be headlines that report that political advertising has reached yet another new record level of cost. And we're sure on our way toward that once again. For those who are jaded and cynical, or at the very least, hesitant and curious about the influence that the two major political parties in the United States might have over so called mainstream media and legacy media, I'm sure that these numbers are only going to confirm the skepticism, uh, and probably confirm for others that there's no doubt that the two political parties and media in general are in the same boat, and with a very dependent relationship with each other. And without getting into the politics of it all, ideology and everything like that, we're just focusing on the data, on the spending by both presidential campaigns and political parties. And a few headlines really stand out this week with the new report that has come out by Ad Impact. And for those who are not familiar with Ad Impact, and Ad Impact is an advertising intelligence company. They gather just tons of data regarding advertising across various mediums, and they do monitoring, advertising monitoring, and so on. And then they build these intelligence reports. So that's who Ad Impact is. Let me just read a little backgrounder that Ad Impact provides in their um, in their press releases, to give you a little bit more specific background on Ad Impact, according to them. So Ad Impact says that they specialize in tracking and analyzing advertising data across various media channels, including traditional, digital, and emerging platforms. Their real-time monitoring captures over 1 billion TV ad occurrences daily, and Ad Impact touts that they maintain the industry's largest ad catalog, consisting of more than 1.2 million unique creatives. Their coverage extends across all 210 American designated market areas, or DMAs, more than 41,000 zip codes, and across more than 20 million IP addresses. Ad Impact says that they capture data in analytics for more than 88,000 brands and advertisers, and that their real time data and analytics empower their users to monitor competitor advertising, spending, messaging, and creatives for quick and informed decision making. So if you want to learn more about Ad Impact, you go to www.adimpact.com. So that's some background on Ad Impact. They've been doing this for quite a while. They are a leader in advertising intelligence gathering and data distribution. And so people look forward to their reports, especially in a presidential election year. So their latest report came out this week, and there's a few headlines that really were pulled from the latest data. One is that Democrats' television spending, and that's spending across television in general, re- whether it's cable, broadcast, streaming, but Democrats' spending on television as of October, early October, was 58% higher than the Republicans. Another headline that came out of this was that the Harris campaign is spending 9 times as much money on social media than the Republicans. And I think another um, big headline was that this past August of 2024, was the first $1 billion political advertising month of the year. So just those three headlines alone um, capture a lot of attention about how this election year and season is going as far as political advertising is concerned. So let's just take a look at the first headline about the overall television spending. This has been going on for quite a while in this election year. The Democrats have outspent the Republicans for a while now, and significantly outspending them. And according to Ad Impact, uh, through October 9th, since late July, so we're only talking about 3 months here, but in the course of 3 months, from July to about just about October 9th, according to their data, Democrats, and that includes the Harris campaign, as well as Democrat Party affiliated groups, they have spent in 3 months, they have spent $1.1 billion on advertising. Um, Republicans are at about 700 million. So once again, Democrats have spent about 1.1 billion from late July through early October. And the Republicans, and that includes the Trump campaign itself, as well as Republican affiliated or Republican favored uh, groups, they've spent a total of about 700 million. But if you look at the time frame from what is known as Super Tuesday in the primaries, which this year was March 5th. So if you go back to March 5th of 2024, which was Super Tuesday, primary day, to October 9th, Ad Impact says its data shows that um, the difference in advertising is basically the same level, the same difference of about $400 million. The Democrats have continued to outspend the Republicans consistently from March through early October, spending $400 million more than Republicans. Um, the total the total presidential election spending so far is $2.1 billion, with just less than a month to go. 2.1 billion in total presidential election spending. And out of that $2.1 billion, 74% went to just a few states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And breaking down those numbers, in Pennsylvania, Democrats have spent just about 160 million. Republicans have spent 120 million. In Michigan, the Democrats have spent 126 million. The Republicans have spent 78 million. In Georgia, The Democrats have spent 73 million compared to the Republicans who have spent just nearing 72 million. That's one of the few states, it's actually the only state as far as swing states are concerned, where it's that close in advertising spending. It's the only one where it's that close of just about $1 million difference. In Wisconsin, Democrats have spent $75 million. Republicans have spent 53 million. In Arizona, Democrats have spent 62 million. Republicans have spent 50. In North Carolina, Democrats have spent 55 million compared to the Republicans who have spent 44 million. And in Nevada, Democrats have basically spent double the money. As in Nevada, Democrats have spent 44 million and Republicans have spent 22 million. Um, so those numbers are mind-boggling. And of course, in those several states that are considered swing states, um, and could be absolutely crucial to either candidate winning, um, the vast majority of that money being spent in that state has gone to your legacy broadcast television. Some of it has gone to local cable advertising, but the vast majority of that television money, and in general across the country, the vast majority of that money has gone to free, over the air, legacy broadcast television stations. Um, so, looking at the Harris campaign and Democrat groups, they have spent 456 million and 364 million respectively. And so what that means, what Ad Impact is reporting is that they differentiate between the Harris campaign proper, the formal Harris campaign, and all Democrat groups that are spending money on television advertising to support the Harris campaign. So according to Ad Impact, between July 22nd and October 9th, the Harris campaign itself has spent $364 million, and those groups supporting the Harris campaign have spent um, $364 million. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Let me repeat that. The Harris campaign itself, the Harris campaign itself has spent from July 22nd to October 9th, $456 million. And it's the affiliated groups, those that are endorsing or supporting the Harris campaign, they spent 364 million. When you look at the Trump campaign and all affiliated groups that are supporting the Trump campaign, from July 22nd to October 9, Ad Impact reports that the Trump campaign was outspent by the Harris campaign 2-1, more than 2-1. Um, the Republican affiliated groups were closer to the Democrat affiliated groups, but the actual two presidential campaigns, it's not even close. The Harris campaign has spent 456 million, and the Trump campaign has spent 204 million, while the groups that are supporting Harris have spent 364 million, and those groups that are supporting the Trump campaign have spent 306 million. Now, what's interesting here is since July 22nd, we've mentioned those swing states that have received almost three quarters of all spending on television. But Pennsylvania stands out of that group of swing states because since July 22nd, Pennsylvania has seen the highest advertising spending, 160 million for the Democrats versus 120 million for the Republicans. And the next highest state of spending is Michigan, which I think a lot of political news folks, a lot of political fans that follow this stuff would be a little surprised that Michigan would be where the second largest spend would be recorded, because Michigan has been considered a Democrat state, a Democrat stronghold, where Harris should win relatively easily. But nonetheless, the Democrats have spent 126 million versus 78 million by the Republicans. The Another little tidbit here is that Ad Impact is reporting that they're projecting, and I don't see how they offer any real specific sources for this particular stat, but Ad Impact is projecting that over the next 3 weeks before Election Day, um, the Trump campaign is going to spend more than Harris for the home stretch here, but not by much. So, Ad Impact is reporting that they believe the Trump campaign will spend about $60 million in the next 3 weeks versus 58 million by Harris. Now, probably where some of that information is coming from by Ad Impact is their intelligence gathering based on advertising being secured on networks and other platforms through ad agencies and so on, maybe by the campaigns themselves. But regardless of how they come up with this data, they are reporting that they do believe that in the last 3 weeks of the campaign, Trump will slightly spend more than Harris, just about $2 million more. But what Ad Impact is also projecting is that even though they believe the two formal presidential campaigns will only be $2 million apart in total television spending in the last 3 weeks, they believe that once again, uh, Democrat groups who are supporting the Harris campaign will easily outspend Republicans at least 2 to 1. And the exact numbers that they're putting out there is that they believe Democrat groups will spend in the next 3 weeks about $209 million, as opposed to Republican affiliated groups where they will spend about 118 million. So interesting numbers there. Um, Talking about the last 3 weeks, um, it is believed that in total there will be about $445 million that is still to be spent by November 5th. And that is based on now specifically Ad Impact does report that some of this information is coming in on reservations, advertising reservations that it has gathered information on. So a lot, it seems like a core source of coming up with that specific data is that Ad Impact has um, their pulse on advertising reservations in the next 3 weeks. But think about that. There is expected to be at least $445 million to still be spent by election day, November 5th. Um, they do believe that the Democrat Party, according to their intelligence gathering, the Democrat Party has outspent Republicans basically throughout the country, um, and in every battleground state. Um, they use July 22nd as a uh, as a critical date in their data gathering because that was just a few days after President Biden announced that he would step away from the election. And so they're saying that more than $1 billion in political advertising has already aired between July 22nd and October 9th. The interesting thing, too, about this is that in social media, what's really interesting here is the Harris campaign has completely blown the Trump campaign out of the water in advertising on social media. Now, um, when we talk about social media, we're talking about just uh, Facebook, Instagram, and think about that. That in the social media sphere, the Harris campaign has spent the overwhelming majority of its money on Facebook and Instagram. In fact, they have spent 55 million dollars with Meta, and if you take that alone, uh, the Harris campaign's advertising spending with Meta, which includes Facebook and Instagram, was about $55 million compared to the Trump campaign, which has spent about just 6 million. So literally, the Harris campaign has spent 9 times the amount of money on Facebook and Instagram alone. And the Harris campaign has placed just about 37,000 ads really over the summer since President Biden said that he was not going to seek reelection. The Harris campaign has placed about 37,000 ads with Meta, and in that same time period, the Trump campaign ran about 5,500 ads. So those numbers are incredible. Just with Facebook alone, Facebook and Instagram alone, how the Harris campaign is outspending, just completely outspending the Trump campaign on Facebook and Instagram. And the interesting thing about that is, Facebook is continually aging in its user base, especially in the United States. and it's something that Meta wants to at least uh, slow down. But all demo research indicates that really the core Facebook user group is about 40 years and older, whereas Instagram does skew younger and more diverse, but nonetheless, it is an older crowd. It's not like TikTok, for instance. So it's interesting that the Harris campaign would spend that much money on Facebook and Instagram. But on the other hand, um, it is of course, a primary digital outlet. So in that sense, it's obvious with the spending that the Trump campaign does not see Facebook and Instagram as key to their reach for potential voters as the Harris campaign does. An interesting bit of data was in the first week of October, in just that 1 week, from about September 30th to October 6th, the Harris campaign spent $3.5 million with Meta. And that's compared to just 890,000 spent by Trump. And that's just a 1 week snapshot of how um, the Trump campaign has been outspent on Facebook and Instagram almost three times the amount of money. Um, Breaking it down a little bit more, the Harris campaign has spent $31.5 million on Google and YouTube ads in the past 3 months. That's compared to just 9 million for the Trump campaign. So once again, more than three times the amount of money has been spent by the Harris campaign on Google and YouTube compared to what Trump has done. Um, Now with TikTok and on X, it's unclear how much the campaigns have spent in reaching voters on those platforms because X and TikTok do not make that data public. Um, but of course, one would expect that there would likely be less on both of those platforms by both campaigns, since the reach the reach is less, and TikTok, of course, is in this legal battle with the United States government. So you can't see those campaigns spending too much with TikTok. And X, since Elon Musk bought the platform, has really um, done a complete turn, where it went from a platform that was heavily liberal, or at very least heavily Democrat in the amount of posts that were on it, to being majority conservative, majority Republican leaning, so on. So you wouldn't expect the Harris campaign to spend that much money on X, and you would think the Trump campaign wouldn't feel like it would need to spend as much. But of course, since Donald Trump and Elon Musk are friendly, I'm sure there's some business being thrown that way. The interesting thing too is when we look at the spending over the last 3 months, it was August where the billion-dollar mark had been met, and it was the largest advertising month for political ads in 2024 so far. And the data on September is still being compiled. But in August, the total spend in August was billion, just over $1 billion, $1,400,000. And that was nearly double what had been spent during July. Since January 1st, now earlier, we talked about going back to March and Super Tuesday. But if you go back to New Year's Day, 2024, from New Year's Day, 2024, through early October, more than 3.5 billion have been spent on political advertising. Dramatic, dramatic pause there. 3.5 billion spent on political advertising since New Year's Day. And if you combine what had been spent during the primary season last year, Ad Impact calculates that the total amount of money for political advertising for the 2024 election cycle has now surpassed, before October 1st, has now surpassed $4.6 billion. And in 2020, by that point, it was at 3.6 billion. So literally, total political advertising by the two parties and affiliated groups is already $1 billion ahead from where we were 4 years ago. So those numbers are just mind-boggling. If you think about the absolute amount of money being spent on political advertising, it is absolutely crazy. But then it's obvious why the media, in general use that quote, why the media covers the election as much as they do, and why especially free broadcast over the air legacy television uh, is going all in on the election, because without the election, the broadcasting revenue would be a lot less diminished, greatly diminished. And there had been there had been reports that we had talked about in an earlier podcast, as well as in some articles that I've posted, about how streaming is ascending. Uh, earlier, uh, Earlier this week, actually, I posted a new article about how YouTube has become the king of television, in the sense that it is the most watched platform on television in general, and how streaming has surpassed cable and broadcast as the number one method of using a television. And so when you look at how streaming has greatly increased in popularity and usage, how cable continues to suffer cord cutting and smaller subscriber bases, and how broadcasting is really being diminished in its importance, in its influence, in its audiences, you can easily see how an election year of any kind, an election, a local, even a local election, and an off year that's not even presidential election, means a lot to broadcast television, because this is money, and it's one of the few sources of continued sustained income that they're getting. And the fact that there's $1 billion that have already been spent more than 4 years ago, and that so much of that money is going to legacy broadcast television, it certainly does play a role in their coverage. I don't think anyone would argue that without getting into is it biased or not. Um, just the fact that so much money is being dedicated by political campaigns to television, uh, obviously they're going to take care of that. As far as customer is concerned, they're going to focus on the campaigns, they're going to focus on the election, they're going to continue reporting on it. Why wouldn't they? People just really need to be, I think, more conscious of the fact, and just be aware of and be educated about just how much money is being given to media. And obviously, whether you believe it's a quid pro quo or not, it's in their best interest to keep people engaged in the campaigns, to keep people intrigued by telling people it's close, by having sensational headlines, by playing sensational sound bites, by leaning toward drama than the issues. We can go on and on about this, but you know, television is a for-profit business. Television news is a for-profit business, and if you are watching a free legacy television news program, and you can see whether it's a half hour news program or more, you could see the ads one after another, and that's tied to what is going to influence what's going to be covered. And maybe in some stations or some networks, how it's going to be covered. um so before we wrap this all up, um let's go back to what ad impact said uh in the last couple of weeks, uh some specific advertising markets, which is pretty interesting. The top markets where the most advertising was dedicated to. If you want to take a guess of the top three cities in the United States. What were the top three cities basically in the last 2 to 3 weeks where advertising was focused on? So we'll start with number three. The third, the third location, the third highest location where political advertising was focused on was Las Vegas. After that, Philadelphia. And the number one market for political advertising in the last few weeks, Detroit, Michigan. And that money that was spent in Detroit in just about 2 to 3 weeks was $28 million. That's total by both campaigns. Philadelphia had about 26 million, and Las Vegas had about $24 million. Um, Kind of steering away from television a little bit, just digging down a little further into the data. Every media, every media industry, let's put it like that, other than newspapers, every media industry has benefited greatly from the election and have received revenue, difference making revenue. And this includes radio. And what's interesting is, um, political pundits, researchers, marketers will tell you that radio has a larger role in the election cycle closer to election day. And I was a little surprised by that. We know that radio in general is also greatly diminished from what it used to be. Here in the New York City area, We used to have two all news channels, and now we have one. Um, and then a lot of AM radio still is geared toward conservative Republican listeners. Um, Not necessarily as diverse as you get on television or digital, but yet radio still had received in general, the industry in general, according to Ad Impact, had received just under $2 billion, and is they're expected to have an income. The industry in general, political advertising, is expected to be about $2 billion by election day. Now that number, of all the stats, the social media stat, I thought was really dramatic, but that number about radio and that total political advertising going up to election day is expected to hit just about 2 billion is incredible. Is incredible because it is in general, when you talk about media and you look at the media landscape in America in 2024, radio is an afterthought. And I don't mean that, I mean, I love radio. I grew up with radio when it was still a big deal. There were disc jockeys and radio hosts that influenced me when I was younger, and I loved to listen to. And I would love to see a radio renaissance. It's sad to see what has happened to radio, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that total advertising for politics this year is going to hit about $2 billion for radio. When radio is one of the most difficult audiences to measure, and a lot of people may not know that for generations, radio ratings, right up until today, radio ratings are for the most part reliant on individuals filling out what's basically a journal and reporting back what station they listen to when. It's not necessarily metered like television is, although there's inroads on that being made. But for the most part, radio remains still a very difficult, vague, mysterious way to measure audiences. So it's probably the least reliable way to actually get measurements as far as the audience, the demo. Probably the demo you could figure out because radio obviously skews much older. But the fact that radio in general is going to get $2 billion is impressive and good for them. Ad Impact reported that the largest radio markets, the markets where uh, radio advertising was the biggest, was number one. Number one was Philadelphia, and more than $127 million is expected to be spent by election day. What has already been spent and what it remains to be spent, it's going to total $127 million by election day for radio in Philadelphia. After Philly was Las Vegas at 107 million. Phoenix radio is expected to take in about 108 million. Los Angeles radio is expected to take in about 85 million by election day, and Detroit radio is expected to take about 82 million by election day. Interesting. And think about that Philadelphia radio in general is taking in $128 million. Also interesting is those spending on Los Angeles radio, because again, just like Michigan, which was a little surprising that the Harris campaign would spend so much money on television advertising in Michigan. In LA, the fact that $85 million is going to be spent on radio advertising, political advertising for radio in LA, is also surprising because it's California, it's Los Angeles. It is as blue, in quotes, it is as blue as you're going to get for voters. So it's a little surprising that the second largest city in the country, that radio market is going to get that much money. But that's what Ad Impact is reporting. So the just a little bit more to round this out before uh, we finish up this podcast for today. Ad Impact is projecting that the 2023-2024 election cycle will be the most expensive of all time, a new record. And it will total, in the end, it will total more than $10 billion. And this is across all media industries: broadcast, cable, radio, satellite, etc. So Ad Impact is saying what we opened up with on this podcast, is that it is projecting that yet again a another presidential election will result in a new record of spending, and this time it's going to exceed $10 billion, and that will be a 13% increase over the previous record set for the 2020 election cycle, which was just about $9.2 billion. Through August of 23, um, they had seen a $652 million spend, and pacing 75% ahead of 2019 and 16% ahead of 2021. And that was for off years, when it was not a presidential election. Um, the other thing that Ad Impact is reporting, they break it down a little bit more too, is that political advertising spending just for the Senate, not for the presidential candidates, but just for Senate, total political spending for Senate races will be about $2 billion, and for the House in Congress, it will be about 1.7 billion. When you go down to governor races, the governor races for this particular election cycle for 2024 is expected to be about $400 million, because there's only 14 seats up for re-election. And when you look at the down ballot consists of all political spending that is not presidential, House, Senate, or governor. Let me just repeat that. Down ballot political spending refers to any advertising that doesn't involve the president's office, any office in Congress, whether it's House or Senate or governor. That spending is expected to be still about $3.3 billion. And on that, you're talking about basically local political advertising spending. And that's a big headline too. So take that in for a moment, that local, I put that in quotes, local political advertising for this cycle is expected to hit 3.3 billion. And that would be for mayor races, city council races, state house races. $3.3 billion for that. So with election day 2024 just a few weeks away, I thought it'd be interesting to share with you a lot of this data that has come out, and to do a bit of a dive into it to really just demonstrate just how much money is being spent on political advertising in an election year for president. And I would just advise, just educate yourself and realize, regardless of what candidate you're supporting, what party you're supporting, if you are supporting a particular party or candidate, just to realize that you are a consumer. We are consumers, and that there's no doubt that when billions of dollars are being spent uh, and given to media for campaigns, you have to believe that there is some influence there, that there is some uh, prioritization that goes on, and what that means to me is, uh, news is a business. It's a horribly run business, but the news industry is more than ever. It's a for-profit business, and it's run mostly by large corporations who are donors, political donors. So a lot of money is just kind of being recycled if you think about it. And a lot of these corporations that own your local television station, the broadcast networks, the digital outlets that are mainstream, they all have their lobbyists, they have their agendas. And so as consumers, we should just all do ourselves a favor as Americans to realize that when you're watching a television news program, regardless if it's 60 minutes or it's your local 11 o'clock news, that there is influence by the sheer amount of money that is coming in. And some of this is entertainment. So there's going to be sensationalism. There's going to be efforts to rile you up. There's going to be efforts to keep you tuned in. There's going to be efforts to dramatize or sensationalize things, because these two political parties alone are spending billions of dollars. And they're not spending it because they think they're not going to get anything for it. So, just as being an educated voter is a good thing to be, and to see all sides of everything. Be an educated television consumer and news consumer as well, and realize that these numbers that are out there really confirm the fact that politics and media are certainly codependent, and we need to be very careful as we consume the content that they're providing us. So that's mediums, messages, and more for today. I hope to speak with you soon again with another podcast. And I thank you for joining us. Be sure to go to our Substack. It's Mediums, Messages, and More at Substack, and find our content there. Or you could find everything, our podcast, our videos, our written content at GeneKingLive.com. Talk to you soon. Be well.